Okay. I don't know why I'm still so nervous. I'm still so nervous to talk about this. All right. So, hey, hello. My name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. All right. Y'all gotta bear with me today. I didn't write a script for this video for two reasons. One, didn't really want to write a script for this video, but also the experience that I'm going to be talking about today is something that I decided that I wanted to talk about on my channel, and I wanted to talk about it as authentically as possible. I just want to kind of sit here and describe an experience that I have been going through for quite some time and recently resolved. But yeah, I have been debating for a really long time whether or not I was going to talk about this. I had said in a video a while back that I was going to talk about it, and then I thought about it and decided not to, and then I thought about it again and decided I should. So just because there's a lot in this that I'm not entirely sure if the wrong person sees it and I'm making it sound like it's so bad. It's really not that bad. It's just something that I feel is important to talk about. And part of why I was so hesitant to make the video is because I'm not entirely sure if a certain somebody sees this and knows or ends up figuring out who I'm talking about, if that could maybe cause problems for me later on down the line. But nevertheless, I decided that this is important to talk about because I feel like it's something that maybe a lot of students, particularly students of color, might experience, and you know, it's not easy. So can you tell I'm struggling for words? I don't know why I'm speaking as if you can't already tell what the video is about. Obviously from the title, the working title for the video that I have in my mind, from the title, obviously you're going to be seeing that I'm talking about the fact that I recently switched my primary advisor in my program, which is something that is not common to do, at least not that I'm aware of. It's actually fairly uncommon, and could be seen as problematic to some degree, but I am just, I guess, going to kind of talk about the things that were happening that led me to make that decision, how I went about making that decision, and why I am honestly so much happier now in my program. And yeah, kind of like all of this ultimately being a lesson in just recognizing and standing firm in your needs and advocating for yourself, and yeah. And why that's important. Yeah, I'm just gonna dive right in. I'm not entirely sure how much of the actual story I'm gonna keep in. Obviously I'm not gonna say any names, because I'm not trying to like put anybody on blast. I'm just gonna talk. We're gonna talk. Oh, I'm gonna talk. You're gonna type in the comments, hopefully. So yeah, yeah, let's go. Okay. I don't know why I'm still so nervous. I'm still so nervous to talk about this. All right. So I guess just going back to the beginning, where it all began. So at the start of my master's program, I joined the lab, a research lab. I joined the lab of a faculty member who I felt like this faculty member's lab kind of aligned most with the kind of research that I wanted to do. And so I joined their lab. The lab was huge, by the way. It's a huge lab, and part of being a newer master's student in a research lab full of second-year master's students, but also a lot of doctoral students, part of being a newer master student is that you want to garner the attention of the faculty member whose lab it is, so that hopefully when it comes time to apply for PhD programs, that faculty member can both offer you really strong letters of recommendation, but also if they themselves are accepting PhD students, the hope is that they would accept you. And so I had done my research on this faculty member, seen the kind of work that he has done before, and also the kind of work that he was doing now in the lab. And up until this point, I had heard nothing but good things about this faculty member, about like just how dedicated he is to his work, how dedicated he is to his students, how supportive he is of his students and their work. And so I was really interested in like working really closely with this faculty member. And so I had started helping out on a lot of different projects in the lab, particularly projects that he was very heavily involved in, to garner like that attention. And so that's kind of how this whole advisor-advisee relationship kind of began. So I have really been working with this faculty member pretty much since day one of my like graduate studies. After I started working with this professor, I kind of started noticing things that I thought were like weird, but that everyone else that I spoke to about it kind of just brushed off as like, oh, that's just how he is. And so I was like, okay, this must be like what all advisor-advisee working relationships are like. So essentially what was happening was before I joined the lab, I had had like 2 meetings with this professor, the second of which I had kind of started telling him about the kind of research that I wanted to do, particularly that I wanted to work with Black families, which was not something that was happening in his lab at the time, because at the time I was the only Black person in his lab. So he was very interested in my research ideas and kind of where I wanted, like the direction I kind of wanted to take my research in, even though it wasn't fully fleshed out at the time. He took a really strong interest in it, or at least so it seemed. But as time went on and I kind of started trying to get more meetings with him so that I can get a little bit more guidance on kind of where I wanted to go with my research, it was very clear to me that he is someone who does not balance things well. And when there's too much on his plate, one of the first things it seems like he sacrifices is his students, or at least that's how it feels to me. So anyway, so one of the first kind of things I started to notice was that anytime I tried to schedule a meeting with him, I would email him, he would respond, I'd tell him when I was available, and then I would not hear from him for weeks at a time. And that would continue for months. And whenever I was finally able to like get a solid meeting day and time scheduled with him, he was either extremely late, or would reschedule a million times. And so kind of I guess, justification I came to in my mind was that, like I said, the lab was huge. He's a very popular faculty member. A lot of people want to work with him, and he is stretched very thin because he is not only a faculty advisor, he was also a professor, he taught classes, and then he had his own like larger research projects happening outside of the program with like the city and the mayor's office. And so he was stretched very thin. And so kind of the justification that I came to my mind was that the lab is huge. There's so many of us, particularly master students. There's so many master students. Obviously, he can't get to see everyone all the time. And that's just the reality of the situation. And so I just kind of dealt with it. I started kind of working on solidifying my thesis on my own, kind of figuring it out on my own. So towards the end of my first year in my master's program is kind of when I started noticing that the support that I kind of needed wasn't really there, but at the same time I was justifying it because I just assumed that because there were so many students kind of vying for his attention that it was bound that some students we're just not going to get as much FaceTime. But he still seemed very interested in my research, which I thought was a good thing. Come second year of my master's program, I had fully decided what I wanted to do for my thesis, and again was kind of still trying to get meetings with him and not really being successful in that. And then obviously second year master's student, PhD application season is quickly approaching, and I was in the midst of gathering my application materials, and I had asked him for multiple letters of recommendation. So now I'm having to like find ways to talk to him about letters of recommendation and applications, but also my thesis, but not really getting the FaceTime that I needed to get like really fulfilled conversations out of that. It was anytime I could get a meeting with him about any of those things, it felt very rushed. It felt very like, you have 5 minutes, tell me what's going on, tell me what you need. Okay, we'll catch up in like a few weeks. And I didn't like that. But again, because I was still a master's student, I was just certain that this was just the thing with his master's student. But in the same first semester of second year, my program got a new faculty member who was teaching a class that I was required to take because it was a requirement for graduation. And I had decided, because she was allowing this, I had decided to use my final paper as a way for me to gain some ground on my thesis, because I was feeling very lost, very like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, because I wasn't able to get the kind of like real one-on-one time with the faculty member whose lab I was in, to kind of understand what I needed to do next. So because I had made that decision to use the paper as a way to work on my thesis, I had ended up having quite a few meetings with that professor to help me with my lit review and my methods, and like kind of deciding what like measures I would use and all of that. This professor had really like kind of came around at a point where I really needed some guidance, and was like willing to provide that guidance for me. I had multiple meetings with her, and then I had also found out through one of these meetings with her that she had a lab that she had just began, a research lab that she had just started because she, you know, was new to the program. And so I had started going to her lab meetings because the work that she was doing sounded really interesting and wasn't necessarily a perfect fit for the kind of research that I was doing, but was a close enough fit that like I felt like I could join their lab and like learn some stuff. So I had started going to her lab meetings. So as deadlines for PhD applications were approaching and I had become relatively like familiar with her, I had also asked her for letters of recommendation, which she was more than willing to provide for me, which was great because she was so new and our, you know, familiarity with each other was so new. As the semester carried on, the deadline for my own like school's PhD program applications was approaching, and I was kind of torn about whether or not I was going to apply for a number of reasons, but the main one being that I don't know how much of this I've described before, if at all, in any of my videos. But essentially my school's PhD program that I'm in now is kind of unique in that the master's program is separated from the PhD program, whereas in other programs you kind of get your master's degree like as you progress. Like the first 2 years of the PhD program is essentially your master's degree. My school has kind of separated those 2 years into its own program. So that is the master's program that I was in, and then anyone applying to my school's PhD program had to have gone and completed the school's master's program. So everyone who is in the PhD program has completed the master's program at the school, but not everyone in the master's program continues on to the PhD program. So essentially my school's PhD program application process is entirely internal. There are no outside applicants whatsoever. I hope that made sense. I really hope that made sense. So as you can imagine, because it's an entirely internal application process. The people who are reading your application and evaluating your application are people who have either gotten to know you through the master's program, are familiar with you, or have at least heard of you from other people who are familiar with you in the program. Like, everyone knows everyone. And so, as you can imagine, there are a lot of politics that come into play with an application process like that. And pretty much like through the first semester of my second year in the master's program, I had kind of started realizing those politics, like recognizing those politics, and kind of feeling like my chances of getting into my school's PhD program were pretty slim, because you start noticing that faculty members have favorites. You start noticing who's kind of being put on a pedestal in your lab, who is kind of being placed at the forefront in terms of master's students. And I'd started seeing that in my lab, or I had felt like I had been seeing that in my lab, and was pretty certain that I knew who was going to be accepted of the second year master students in my lab, and I felt like I was not going to be one of them. So I was kind of on the fence about applying to my program in general for those reasons, but decided that, you know, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to apply anyway. Backtracking for a second, in my first lab, my lab advisor was, because he had known what kind of research I wanted to do, but hadn't really been involved in kind of like the creation of my thesis, he would still tell people about the work I was doing. Like, he was making announcements in the lab meetings about the kind of work that I wanted to do. He would bring it up whenever it felt relevant, and like emphasizing that I was like planning to work with Black families. And every time he would bring it up, I would always kind of have this internal dialogue with myself of like, okay, it's great that you're so enthused about my research, but you actually have no idea what I'm doing. And that just never sat right with me. So that was another thing that kind of was pushing me to have this conversation with this other professor. And so on my school's PhD application, you have the option to apply to 2 faculty members' labs, like a first choice and a second choice. And I had kind of just decided that I was going to have another meeting with the professor who had been helping me with my thesis, and kind of just ask her if she would be okay with me listing her on my application. And so I did. I had a meeting with her, and I asked her if I could list her on my application, and she said yes. But she also asked me why at the time. And I was frank with her, and I told her, of all the other faculty members outside of my lab advisor, who I had been kind of getting to know up until that point, I felt like she was a faculty member who I felt like I could do great work with. She does a lot of work with minoritized youth. I wanted to work with Black families, and she was also demonstrating to me that she was much more willing to make time for students than my current lab advisor was. But also, just on a strictly interpersonal level, I felt like the support, like I felt like I had learned so much from her already in the very short amount of time that we had been working together, much more than I had learned from my current lab advisor at the time. And that I just felt so much more comfortable in her lab and in her presence, and, you know, just all of the things, all of the good things. Yeah, so I had that conversation with her, and I had told her that I was going to be listing her as my first choice, and that I was going to be listing my, at the time, current advisor as my second choice. And she said okay. But that's not the point at which I changed advisors. You would think it is because of how the story went, but that's not what happened. So as you can tell, I had kind of started recognizing these red flags in my advisor at the time, and was doing what I felt like I could to avoid a problem in the future. But obviously that didn't happen. So fast forward a bit, applications are submitted, interviews are done. I have listed the newer professor as my first choice for my program. I have listed my current lab advisor as my second choice, which I did without talking to him, by the way. That, I will admit, that is something that I didn't do, that I probably should have done at the time. I did not tell him that I was not listing him as my first choice on my application. So yeah, fast forward. So it's time for admission letters to go out. So imagine my surprise when I get my admission letter and I had been accepted as a student for my original for my original lab advisor, and not the professor that I had had a conversation with, who had literally basically helped me build my thesis from the ground up. I was really shocked, very happy because I got into the PhD program, but still very, very shocked. But after, you know, admission letters had gone out, he had called me to kind of congratulate me. And I guess I felt like things would be different. You know, PhD student now, and there's obviously fewer PhD students for him to keep track of than there are master students. PhD students are to some degree more, like there's more at stake for the PhD students when it comes to research. And so I just guess I felt like, oh, like this is the start of him being much more involved in my research, much more supportive of my research, you know, easier to contact. You know, now I had his phone number. I just felt like things would be different. So I was trying to be hopeful. I tried. I tried. So PhD program starts, first year starts, and it's just more of the same. I very quickly realized it's just more of the same. Still very difficult to get a hold of, still very difficult to schedule meetings with him. Now, being in the first year of my program, I am like really heavily like trying to finish my thesis, and every time I tried to schedule a meeting with him for my thesis, it was very rushed, it was like 5 minutes, okay, give me an update, tell me what you need, all right, see you in, you know, talk to you in a few weeks. And I just really didn't like that. I just really didn't like it. I did not like feeling like it gave very much "you are an inconvenience" energy. I don't know how else to explain it. It gave very much, what do you want, you know, in like the annoyed kind of way. Just, it was killing my vibe. It was killing my vibe. So now is when I'm realizing that, okay, so he's still like this with PhD students. Like, that's not really a good thing. And it was made even worse now because he had recently received a new position in the program, a higher position in the program. And so now had even more work on his plate, and had also like received a new grant to do a lot of work. And he was all of a sudden on sabbatical. So he accepted PhD students and then went on sabbatical for a year. So it just, the whole sabbatical thing, I think, put a really bad taste in my mouth because I didn't even know about it. I didn't even know about it till after the school year started. I just found out that he was on sabbatical, and I was like, oh. So on top of already having so little time to meet with him, now he's not even gonna be on campus. Got it. Got it. Cool. So for the first few months of the program, I tried to work with it. I really did. I would, instead of emailing him when I wanted a meeting, because obviously past experience has shown that he will stop responding to emails, I would text him when I wanted a meeting, and that kind of was like, okay, he'll answer text messages faster, that's obvious. But it was still like, we would schedule a meeting and then he would either show up like 20-30 minutes late because he was like behind on all of his meetings for the day, or he would reschedule and then the rescheduled time would come, and then he would reschedule again, and then eventually the meeting would just not happen. And that went on for the entire first semester of my PhD program. By winter break, I think I was kind of already done with it. Like, I was over it. But I felt at the time like I couldn't do anything about it because he accepted me as a student, and like I'm obligated to work with him because he accepted me as a student. But there was also kind of some other things in the back of my mind at this point, because it was not lost on my cohort that we are the most diverse cohort that my program has ever had. In terms of race and ethnicity, we are the most diverse cohort that the program has ever admitted. This was very obvious to us. And so now there was a part of me in the back of my mind that had wondered if I had only been accepted because I was Black. Because like I mentioned earlier, I was the only Black, at the time of my joining the lab, I was the only Black student in the lab. And at the time of applications, I was the only Black student applying for his lab. Not the only student of color, but the only Black student applying to his lab. And I am a student who wants to do work with Black families, which is not something that was being done in his lab. But was something that he seemed very proud to announce to people whenever it felt relevant. And so at this point, now I'm wondering if I was only accepted because I was the only Black student who had applied to work with him. So by winter break, I was done, but felt trapped in a way. And throughout all of this time, I'm still in the other professor's lab. Like, I was in two labs simultaneously. I was in my actual lab, and then I was in the other professor's lab, kind of helping out where I could. And I was still having occasional meetings with her, just kind of to catch up, catch her up on where I am with my thesis, get any guidance from her that I may need that I couldn't get from my advisor because I couldn't get meetings with him. And whenever I had these meetings with her, she could see my frustration, and she was so apologetic, and she felt so bad that I was experiencing the things that I was experiencing. And at one point I had disclosed to her that I felt just really out of place in my lab that I was in. It had gotten to the point where I just felt so out of place in my lab, but that I felt stuck. And so at the time, she had just really encouraged me to, start reaching out to other people who could support me, including herself. Like, she was very much like, I'm still here as a resource whenever you need me. And I was so appreciative of that. But also she encouraged me to reach out to other people to, build my advising support system, because I just felt so unsupported by my advisor. And so that's what I started to do in my second semester. So in a video that I posted a little while back, maybe like a month ago, you'll hear me talk about how I spent a lot of time this year, but this semester in particular, kind of reframing my support system. And that was largely due to the advice that I got from this professor, and kind of how I ended up having this story to tell. So second semester starts, and I am like in the throes of my thesis. I am interviewing participants, I am transcribing interviews, and a particular situation with my thesis happened that completely threw a wrench in my progress, and I was freaking out. And so I had texted my advisor to have an emergency phone call meeting, because I really did not know what to do in that point in time. I was really freaking out. I had stressed to him that I needed the meeting like soon. And so he actually had scheduled me later on in the day, which I commend him, because that literally never happens. But in typical fashion, it was a very rushed phone call. I had maybe like 10-15 minutes to kind of explain everything that had happened and then try to talk through solutions with him. And by the end of the phone call, I did not feel any better. When I explained to him what happened, he kind of laughed it off, which I guess was his attempt to kind of like make me feel like better about the situation. Like, oh, like this happens, you know, it's just a part of research, you know, things go wrong, which is all fine and dandy, like totally fine, I get it, shit happens, right? But his solution that he came up with wasn't really like a solution that I was happy with. It was like, he just was like, we just need to hurry up and move past this so you can get more participants in. He didn't say it like that, but that was the vibe it gave. It was like, okay, it happened, boom, get over it, move on. Whereas I was really trying to salvage, I was really at the time worried about the integrity of my study. That was something that is something that I'm very passionate about, is the integrity of my work. And I felt like he wasn't taking that part of it as seriously as I was. I don't know if it was because of the kind of research that I'm doing. I'm obviously now realizing I am more of kind of like a qualitative researcher. That's kind of what I'm more interested in. He's very quant focused. So I don't know if it was just because he isn't as familiar with qualitative research and how much of the researcher actually goes into doing that kind of work, and kind of like how attached you become to your work when you're a qualitative researcher. But I just felt very like dismissed almost after that conversation. And so after that conversation, I did not have another meeting with him for like the rest of the semester. And not intentionally either. We just ended up going back to the same routine of trying to schedule meetings and them not happening for one reason or another. So again, throughout this semester, I'm still involved in the other professor's lab. I'm getting more involved in projects in her lab. I am having more meetings with her. I'm having more meetings with other faculty members who are really like giving me the support that I needed to get my thesis done and get it done right. And my actual advisor at this point has no clue what's happening with my thesis. All he knows is that I'm working on it. At this point, I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this for another 3 years. Like, I don't know if I can do this for another 3 years. Like, I cannot work with someone who seems to not make his students a priority, or at least not make some of his students a priority. Because one of the things I started realizing was that he seemed a lot closer to some students than others, and some students were having regular meetings with him, literally weekly meetings with him, while I was struggling to get a meeting once a month. And I'm not really sure why that is. Again, swirling in my mind is the, oh, he only accepted you because you're Black. And that was kind of constantly in the back of my mind, but I always tried to like put it away and ignore it, because I want to believe that I was accepted on the merit of my application and that like I deserve to be here, right? Imposter syndrome is a hell of a thing, but I had just like started thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I can do this for another 3 years. I don't know what the hell I'm gonna do. And so the idea to switch advisors kind of popped up, but I wasn't really sure if it was something I was allowed to do, so I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't ask about it. I was just kind of just like, wouldn't it be nice if I could do that, right? I had no intentions of actually asking like anyone if that was a possibility. But the nail in the coffin, what really put the nail in the coffin and made me decide like this is something I need to look into, was this is gonna make my former advisor sound really bad, but I promise you he is such an amazing person. Like, he is such an amazing person. I don't want to make him sound so bad. I feel bad that this makes him sound bad. But the nail in the coffin was that towards the end of this recent semester, towards the end of the semester, a few things kind of happened, right? So if y'all remember, I had gotten really sick right after spring break, a couple weeks after spring break. And like during the time that I was sick, my lab advisor had a meeting with me and the 2 other students, and like 2 other first-year PhD students who were working with him. And I, for some reason, was like terrified to tell him that I was sick. utterly terrified to email him to tell him like, I can't be at the meeting because I, XYZ, I am really sick. I just got out of the hospital, like I just can't be at this meeting. And so because of that, I still logged into Zoom and got on the meeting. But I was like in bed. I was like in bed, wrapped up in a blanket. Like my blinds were closed. It was pretty dark in my room. And I wasn't really talking much in the meeting. I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I was expecting anything, but he just seemed oblivious to the fact that I was like very clearly not okay. And was talking about the fact that we needed to publish more papers. Just rambling on about the fact that we needed to work on getting more work published. Like we needed to write a paper and get it published. And was just very intent on having conversations about what kind of research we could do, or what research we already had in our history that we could turn into journal submissions. And it had occurred to me during that meeting, I was like, he has never once asked, at least not in these meetings, he has never once asked any of us just kind of like how we're doing. Like never asked if like we're okay, how we're feeling, if our mental health is okay, if we're feeling support. Like never once asked any of those questions. And it didn't occur to me until that particular meeting that he had never asked me, or any of us for that matter in those meetings, how we're doing as humans, as people, just how are you feeling? And I was just like, damn. Because I had also realized in that moment that every time I spoke to the other professor whose lab I was also in, anytime I volunteered to do more work in the lab, her first question was, do you feel like you have the bandwidth for that? I don't want you to take on more work than you feel you can comfortably manage. And I had realized that my current advisor was the complete opposite. Like he just expected you to be able to do it all because he does it all, right? He has so many positions that he does. He's on so many different projects. He advises so many students. He has a family. Like he can do it all. So he just expects that all of his students can do it all. And I didn't like that. And so in that meeting, he asked about a position that he wanted one of us to take on. And it was like a research assistant position on a project that he's helping with. And so we all kind of thought about it, and we all decided like we don't have the bandwidth for it. We don't have the time, we don't have the mental capacity, we don't have the energy. Like we are stretched so thin because of this program already. Like we're not gonna add any more to our plate, and add to our burnout. And so one of the students who is also the lab, like the lab manager, went back to him and told him that, the three of us decided like none of us can do this position. And she came back and told us that his response was like, he was baffled that we said no. Like he just couldn't understand how none of us felt like we could add any more to our plate. Like, I think she said his exact words were like, oh, it's only 5 hours a week. Like, what do you mean no one can do it? And I was like, 5 hours a week I don't have, like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I don't want to work from 6 a.m. to midnight every day like you, sir. Like, I would like to be able to get to bed at a reasonable time. I would like to be able to relax at some point during the day. Like, I'm not trying to kill myself at work. I'm sorry that not everyone is okay with working 18 hours a day like you. Like, what? So that was the nail in the coffin for me. That was when I was like, oh no. I can't do this for 3 more years. And so I decided I was gonna try again with the other professor. So I sent her an email and scheduled a meeting with her. And in that meeting, I just very frankly told her, look, I am feeling really unsupported in my lab. I am feeling unsupported by my advisor. You have been one of the few people who has given me the support that I need in this program. You have literally helped me with my thesis from the ground up. And at first I didn't ask her like outwardly if I could switch her as my primary advisor. I had kind of started off by asking her if I could just have more regular meetings with her. And it was like coming to the end of the semester. So I was kind of just like, next year at the start of fall, at the start of next year, can we just, transition into having more regular meetings? Because I feel like you have given me the support that my other advisor has not, and I could really benefit from more of that. And when I tell you the look of relief that washed over her face, she was like, okay, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to like influence your thought process or anything, but I have been really worried about you this year. And I was like, what? She was like, I have been so worried about the level of support that you have been receiving. And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want you to feel like I was like trying to like manipulate you or influence you and how like you felt about your advisor. But I've recognized the lack of support that you've been getting. And absolutely, if you want to start having more meetings with me, we can. And when I heard her say that, the wave of relief that then washed through me was like, oh my God. I was like, oh my goodness. Thank you so much. And then it was actually like simultaneously, like in this conversation, I was about to say it and then she ended up saying it at the same time as me, where it was kind of like we started saying like, she could even be like my primary advisor. And when we both kind of said it at the same time, it was like we both knew in that moment, like, okay, like this is happening, cool, great. So she was kind of like, have a conversation with him, have a conversation with whoever else you need to have a conversation with, come to me, let me know if I need to have a conversation with anyone, let me know if there's any paperwork that needs to be done, but we're gonna make this happen. And I was like, oh. So basically after that, we kind of just went on to just very excitedly talk about next steps in terms of my research and, finishing up my thesis, starting my dissertation, the work that I was already helping with in her lab. It was all very exciting from that point on. So that meeting ended and I emailed my current advisor to get a meeting with him. I didn't tell him what I wanted to talk about, but I told him that I wanted to have a meeting with him. He responded, and lo and behold, unsurprisingly, we started once again going through this whole trying to schedule a meeting and the meeting not happening. And this went on for like another month or so. Until finally, like I emailed him and was like, no, okay, we really need to have this meeting. Like it was another one of those, like I had to stress the importance of the meeting in order for him to take the meeting seriously and actually have the meeting with me. And so I sent him another email essentially saying like, okay, no, I really have something I need to talk to you about. When can we meet? So he ended up scheduling me for right after our larger general lab meeting. And I thought we were gonna have, I don't know why I thought this, but I thought we were gonna have like at least 30 minutes to talk, right? We get on the call and he just jumps right into asking me about my thesis, asking me about, updates. And I'm giving him those updates because he's asking, right? We're like now 15 minutes into the meeting. I've spent the past 15 minutes giving him updates about my thesis because it's the first time I'm giving him updates on my thesis in like 3 months. And we're now 15 minutes into the meeting and he suddenly goes, all right, well, I have to hop off in like 5 minutes for another meeting. So is there anything else you wanted to talk about? And I was like my mind was blown. If anything had been hindering me from that point on fully diving into and like solidifying this decision, that right there was enough for me to be like, oh no, okay, yeah, this is happening. So because he only left me with 5 minutes to say what I needed to say, I, within like 3 minutes, just very bluntly was like, the lab is huge. I feel unsupported. I'm not getting what I need out of this relationship. Would you mind if, you know, this other professor kind of takes on the position of being my primary advisor and you kind of take on a more secondary role in my, you know, research? And he instantly, and I don't know if it was because it came out so bluntly because I was short on time or if it was just the request in general was not something he was expecting, but he was very obviously shocked, like taken aback by my question. He kind of like stopped for a second before answering, and then kind of like very within a few seconds gathered himself and was like, one, I think it's great of you to be able to, like, you know, say that, and I know that that probably wasn't easy for you to say, so I appreciate that. But yeah, I think, you know, if you're feeling like this other professor can offer you more support and that's what you need right now, then sure. But at the same time, he kind of like inserted like, you know, but I still, you know, want to be, I still hope to be very involved in your dissertation, you know. And he kind of like went on a spiel about how in other situations, the like secondary advisor on the dissertation is like not so involved in the research, but like he doesn't want to fall into that role. Like he wants to still be very heavily involved in my research. And so I was kind of like, okay, so you're saying you're okay with this, but you're also kind of hinting that you're not so okay with this, but you know, I'll take it. So that's how that conversation happened. It ended up not really being a conversation, but more so like a statement of fact, like, this is what I need, I'm not getting it, so this is what I'm doing. And he just was kind of like, okay. And I, after that meeting, emailed my now new advisor and told her how the meeting went, and scheduled another meeting with her just to finalize a couple of things. And once I had that meeting with her, I then emailed the director of my program and just double checked with her to make sure any paperwork that needed to be done got done. And then that was that. I switched to my primary advisor at the end of the first year of my PhD program. And through talking to my now new advisor, I had actually come to find out that when the whole application thing went down, and I listed her first, her and my advisor had a conversation about that. I don't know what was said. I didn't ask what was said, but she did tell me that they talked about it. A conversation was had, and through that conversation that they had, a decision was made that my original advisor would be the one who accepted me. And she actually apologized to me for that, because she recognized that that was in a way me trying to do what I had just done, and she was afraid that I felt like rejected because of that, or like dismissed almost because of that, because I had kind of tried to avoid this whole, essentially this whole like experience before it even happened. And she felt very badly that that was the outcome of their decision at the time. And she was more than willing. She was very much looking forward to being my primary advisor from this point on. And I was very excited for that change as well. And so yeah, I am so much happier now in my program. I am so much more excited about the research plans that I have and the research that I've already done. And yeah, I guess the whole point of me telling this story was really just to highlight how important it is to really just advocate for yourself and not settle when it comes to things in your PhD program, especially matters like this. I was just so done. Like it had gotten to the point where I did not want to do research solely because I did not want to have to try to interact with my advisor, because it was just so unsuccessful. And anytime I did interact with him, I felt so much more stressed out and simultaneously unsupported. So like I said, he has taken on a more secondary position in my research, but is still pretty involved. He was the second reader on my thesis and will be on my dissertation committee, but obviously I am now having very regular meetings with my primary advisor, my new primary advisor, having very regular meetings with her. She's amazing. So like I said, really the whole point of this was just to stress how important it is to advocate for yourself and to not settle for anything. Don't feel like you are obligated to stay in any working relationship that you feel uncomfortable in. Recognize what it is you need, vocalize what it is you need, and make sure that you get what you need. It's so important, especially going into a career field that is so very white. It is so very white, and so just surrounding yourself with the people that are genuinely going to give you the support you need is so very important. I have said this in a previous video and I will say it again because it's just so important to have people of color, but in my case specifically, it's so important to have Black people. It's so important to have Black people entering this field and sticking around. The issue is not that Black people don't want to become psychologists. The issue is that we face so much opposition and have so little support that people just don't stick around. They essentially get pushed out, forced out. The support just isn't there. And now that I'm recognizing how important that is, bitch, I'm unstoppable. I am unstoppable. I am so excited to continue in my program now. And yeah, that's it. So anyway, thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I truly appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if this is something that you have experienced. If it is, tell me how you kind of maneuvered the situation, because I think it's really important to talk about these experiences and share stories of these experiences so that people can know that like shit like this actually happens, and like when it's happening to you, you're not like crazy for feeling the way you feel. So yeah, other than that, let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and click that little notification bell so you don't miss my next upload, and I'll see you in the next one.